Hey guys, this is the third episode of the Behes Podcast. This podcast is an attempt to connect with you guys over the reading list of the curriculum that we set over the course of the season.
This year's theme is the power of yes.
We have discussed a lot of the things that we discussed within that theme. But today we're going to talk about persuasion, we're going to talk about surveillance, and we're going to be discussing one movie selection and two musical selections. It's going to be a real fun episode. Do stick around to the end. All right. So one of the main themes in our curriculum that we studied this year was propaganda and how it is used, who uses it, and why. And we try to give you some examples of that in our movie selections. Of course, there was a short film titled The Millionaire that was produced by the Soviets. That was Soviet propaganda. But today we'd like to discuss the Ducktators. And without giving too much away, Christy Verghese, who's our program manager at Counterpoint EduLabs, did his research on it, and we'll let him kick the discussion off. So the Ducktators, Christy, what do you think of that film?
Thank you, Salil. Just like you said, I'll think it's best if I get right to it. And the Ducktators happens to be a production by the Warner Brothers, and it was produced in 1942. It's a little over 7 minutes long, but I had to do some extensive research for this podcast. As you can see, I have my notes handy here with me. And for the benefit of those who have not yet watched the Ducktators, I'll just quickly highlight the gist of that short animated movie. The name in itself, the Ducktators, I mean, it bears a close resemblance to the dictators. I mean, that's clear as daylight. The movie starts off with a mother duck prancing around a little black egg, and out of that black egg emerges a duck with the words "Sing hi!" And and that duck has this pronounced whiskers that Adolf Hitler sports. But okay, moving on. This duck proceeds to have a following of his own. It's pretty, you don't need any extensive research as such to understand this is propaganda of sorts. I mean, this is what happened. Hitler amassed a following of his own, and similarly, the duck amasses a follower of his own, and he also attains a fan in the form of this burly, heavy-set geese, who resembles Benito Mussolini. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If not, you may place it down in the comment section.
Wait a minute!
Benito Mussolini.
The funny thing, okay, it's not really funny, I think it's kind of stereotypical, but when Mussolini is introduced, there is this theme, there is this opera Figaro thing playing in the background. I'm not really...
From the Barber of Seville, like an opera, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, as the movie proceeds, the team of Hitler Duck and Mussolini Goose is they gain another worthy teammate in the form of this Japanese duck, who closely resembles, as per what I've read and what I saw, Hideki Tojo, who was the general of the Imperial Japanese Army and who also served as the Prime Minister of Japan for the majority of World War II.
And they show him in a very racist way. Like he has stereotypical Chinese or Oriental features, as you mentioned, and he speaks in a very weird accent, like "me no speak English." Like it's like a very weird, racist.
As we proceed through the movie, we catch a glimpse of the Dove of Peace. Apparently the Dove of Peace, but yes, the Dove of Peace happens to cut a very sorry figure, and he or she is shown to be a very calm, humble, and a pleading figure throughout the former half of the Ducktators. There was a peace conference or something of that sort in the Ducktators, and a peace treaty that is handed to the Axis powers. The Axis powers are referred to as asses in the movie, if you watch that out. So it is supposed to be funny in some terms, but I'm sorry, I couldn't help but watch it from the perspective of an outsider. who could see that this is clearly propaganda. During the peace conference, which is, as per my research, it was the 1938 Munich Pact. Well, after that, during the movie, Hitler Duck proceeds to shred the treaty that was submitted, and then the Ducktators, that is the three ducks, they trample on the Dove of Peace, and the Dove of Peace happens to just requesting everyone to listen. But okay, everyone pass him over. Each duck passes him by, and that's when the Dove of Peace happens to gain some confidence. I mean, it is clearly visible in the movie in itself that duck all of a sudden he has his shoulders back and his chest just widens, and I think that was the phase when Churchill came into the picture. And Churchill comes in, and to make a long story short, he just thrashes the living daylight out of the Ducktators, and he proceeds to have their heads mounted on his wall like some war trophy. I mean, we don't have that thing in India, but then it's a very clear image in American movies where people have heads of bears and antelopes mounted on their wall. Towards the end of the movie, there is a request. It's like a plea from the producers that if you want to see this happen, if you want to see the Axis powers vanquished, defeated, the plea is that you please buy some security bonds from the US government. And I think that last bit in itself should be a telling sign that this is not comedy, this is not really an animated film, this is clear cut propaganda.
I would like to say that it is comedy, it is an animated film, and also it's propaganda. And I think that's always been a sign of the US's soft power, like they can package anything in the form of mainstream entertainment and let it out there. I think it's not just the animated movies, like there's a couple of others you guys can check out. There's this movie called Tokyo Jokyo, which is a very nice example of American propaganda, and a couple of others. There's one in which Daffy Duck plays Adolf Hitler as well. So yeah, I think obviously it's very clearly propaganda and like unabashed, as in if you want this to happen, pay us money so that we have more money to fight against the Axis powers. So yeah, I do think it's very clear what the idea was.
But
and
then
there were moments when I found that it was really, really hilarious. Like when the South Germany duck is introduced. And I mean, the Japanese guy trying to get away by saying that he's a Chinese dude.
Yeah.
Like, for me, it was hilarious and very racist.
Yeah. That was a joke on the way Westerners see Oriental people. Chinese, Japanese can't tell the difference. I really enjoyed that one as well.
But then, what do you think? This movie, it was not broadcasted. It was not broadcast over American televisions after the end of World War II. I mean, it's almost like they were self-conscious that this is something that we are aware of and we are kind of ashamed of, which is why we won't be showcasing this anymore. But okay, yeah.
I didn't know that. They never showed this after 1945 and stuff.
No.
And I do know that there are versions of this that are available in which the ending part isn't there. Like at the end, when they ask for the savings bond, buy this so that we can they remove it. There's a scene at the end where the duck hits himself on the head with a hammer, right? In the other version, it stops right there, and the last part isn't there. But they didn't know that YouTube would come 70 years later, and the whole world would be able to see what they've been up to. So.
It's somewhat funny. I mean, there's some dark comedy in the animated movie in itself, but I think it's funny how towards the end of an animated film, the producers they cut the movie short with a plea, with a request that if you would really like to make this happen, if you want to see us win, give us money, give your government some money so that we can go on and defeat our opponents. I mean, it does not seem very effective, but then it is an attempt at persuading the viewers, right?
So that leaves us at a good point, because persuasion is one of the things that we included in the reading list this year. Now it's a very often used word, but we want to delve a little bit deeper into it and understand what are the ways in which people can be persuaded and what are the ways in which it is used every day. Persuasion is basically when you try to change the opinions or behavior of somebody through sending them a message through communication. Now there are many other ways to change the behavior of somebody or to make them do something you want, like maybe point a gun to their head or threaten to kidnap their children or in many other ways. But all of these we are not considering right now. We are only talking about using communication to persuade someone. There are two kinds of persuasion. One is central and the other is peripheral. So central persuasion is the kind of persuasion that tries to use the logical and analytical brain of the listener. So it requires a stronger structured message. The content of the message, so that it appeals to the rational aspect of someone's brain, needs to be stronger. So it takes more effort to accomplish central persuasion, but it's generally agreed that the effects are longer lasting than peripheral persuasion. Peripheral persuasion, on the other hand, tries to hit out at the listeners' emotional aspects. So peripheral persuasion can be achieved by, for example, saying that please give us money if you want Winston Churchill to beat up all the Axis powers. For example, a good-looking person is more likely to sell you stuff on TV and advertisements than a person who is not classically good-looking. And this is done because they are more likely to appeal to the emotional aspect in you, and that's just science. You may say, I'm not superficial, but that's how our brains work. So yeah, that's peripheral persuasion. So the interesting point here, and I'll leave it for discussion after this, is it has been found that you shouldn't use central persuasion for every kind of message. So for example, if you need money right now and you need money for something like a national perspective, then you're better off using emotional persuasion. But for longer lasting messages that you need to stay forever, I guess central persuasion seems to be the way to go. It is more difficult to accomplish, but has stronger and longer lasting effects. So yeah, I just want to get your guys' opinion on that.
So there was this very famous ad by Raveena Tandon for the brand called Rotomac. It was released back in 80s or 90s. And the only demand that the producer had was to cast Raveena Tandon. And it did not matter how she endorsed the product, but what mattered was she took it out of her blouse. So now, how do we situate voyeurism or or any aspect of this in peripheral persuasion?
Yeah, for sure. There's nothing rational about that. Why we respond to that?
I think every celebrity, every Indian captain gets into that whole field of becoming ambassadors of these brands and these companies using their faces and their voices. Not even their voices, real voices. Most of the times they are dubbed in different regional languages for each state and city. And yeah, it's just the face that is used.
How rational is, say, MS Dhoni promoting a brand of plumbing pipes?
Or pankha.
What kind of persuasion do we count it as? Is it logical, or if it is even not peripheral, right? It falls somewhere between. Like, we know MS Dhoni is a great person and that is a great player, so there is logic in that. But him endorsing pipes, how logical is that? So what kind of persuasion is that? I mean, why do we get persuaded to buy those pipes?
I think at that point, the connection between the guy selling it and the product itself ceases to make a difference, because so many people's emotions are tied so closely to the Indian cricket team and especially its captain that it's tough. Another example that one of you were mentioning, I think a few days ago, was that of the Slice ad with Katrina in it. And yeah, there's like basically the examples are endless.
Yeah, I think it's also because of repetitive nature of the advertisement, man. Like, it's just not the actor showing it, but the billboards everywhere in the city and the advertisement every once at least once or twice every half an hour. So the repetitive nature, it gets stuck in your subconscious mind. So I just want to understand, is peripheral also mean repetitive advertisement?
So I'll give you an example of that. For anybody, like when we are younger, we form our value system, right? And there are people who we are enamored of at a certain age, and then we stop being enamored of them after a certain age. Maybe not just people around you, but even ideologues and writers and stuff like that. So, for example, somebody who hears about Gandhiji and how great Mahatma Gandhi is, etc., all the way while they're in school and college, and they only receive it in terms of an emotional stimulus. Arey, he used to stay hungry for the nation and all of that. Then it's more likely that that will wear off. But for on the other hand, somebody who actually studies theory and read his works and understood what ahimsa is, went on to read about transcendentalism and Thoreau, and truly get into the ideology itself, is more likely to be persuaded in that direction for a longer period of time, because central persuasion was being accomplished and not just somebody influencing you to do that. Guys, the concept of surveillance, mass surveillance, and surveillance states is something that we asked you to study in this reading list. So we have a very special guest in our podcast for the very first time. She was one of the finalists in our adjudicators quiz that we held a couple of weeks ago, and hence she is a part of this podcast, and we hope that we'll have her back here again. That is, of course, an ex-member of the Behes community, Miss Deeksha Sharma. Deeksha, if you could please take it away.
Let's start by defining surveillance. Surveillance is basically keeping a careful watch over a person or a place suspected of a wrongdoing. Now, why is debate over surveillance so interesting? The debate is so interesting because there is no person who is absolutely for or absolutely against surveillance. The disagreement is on multiple levels. Firstly, there is a disagreement on what counts as surveillance, then what technology should be allowed in the means to surveillance, then whether there should be limits on surveillance, and what should be those limits, right? So there are disagreements on various levels, so the debate can happen on various levels. Surveillance is made a very important topic by two factors. First is the fear of terrorism, the disproportionate fear of terrorism, and second is the digital revolution that's taking place. Studies show that the number of people who die from terrorist attacks is far, far less than those who die from homicides. However, despite this fact, we fear terrorist attacks or dying in terrorist attacks more than we fear being killed by our own family members. And this lack of relation between facts and what we feel is because of two factors: availability heuristics. The reason we fear terrorist attacks so much is because they can come to our mind more easily. We can recall a number of terrorist attacks from around the world more easily than we can recall cases of homicides, right? Why do these cases come to our mind so easily? It is because of how they are reported, right? So media plays a very important role in how we think about surveillance. Now, it is media that manufactures our consent, in the words of Noam Chomsky, for surveillance and hence for giving away our privacy, right? So manufacturing consent through media for surveillance by creating a cognitive bias that more people die from terrorist attacks than by any other thing, and hence we agree to giving powers to government to surveil us. The second factor is digital revolution. Surveillance has been made so easy by the amount of technologies that's coming in the market. Edward Snowden, I think in 2013, he revealed a number of highly confidential documents regarding the surveillance operations of the US government. In one of the documents that he revealed, it was large US telecom companies like Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, all these that boast of protecting our data are actually selling our data without our consent to the US government so that the government can surveil on us. Now, these two factors are the reason why we talk about surveillance today. So what are the debates within surveillance, right? What is something that people disagree on? Firstly, people are thinking of whether privacy is a non-negotiable right, whether privacy and safety are absolute, Whether we have to let go of our privacy in order for the government to surveil us and hence keep us safe. Whether people care about domestic and foreign surveillance equally. Pew Research Center, which is a very famous research center for conducting polls in the US, it shows that people in US care hardly about what their government does outside the country. So they care hardly about foreign surveillance, but they care extremely well about how the government surveils them, that is domestic surveillance. So people care a lot less about foreign surveillance. The other reason, the other debate that goes on is whether limits should be placed on how much data government can collect, or whether the limit should be placed on how the government will use this collected data. Now let's come to the most contemporary topic right now, that is surveillance during the times of pandemic. Is surveillance helping us? Pandemics have shown that surveillance can serve a great benefit, right, when used in the right way. So the usage of Arogya Setu in order to track COVID patients and prevent the spread is a great initiative and a great use of surveillance. Similarly, the state of Florida using ankle GPS in order to track movement of patients. Italy using surveillance through helicopters to prevent the spread of coronavirus. All these technologies tells us that is a great benefit that accrues from the use of surveillance. But what sometimes become an issue in using this surveillance is that sometimes this data can be mishandled. For example, the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation, it had data of the COVID patient and it released them and made them public. Now a lot of people argue that that was not the right thing to do because coronavirus or any new infection for that matter carries a lot of stigma with itself, especially in countries like ours right now.
Maybe like I thought that Arogya Setu, of course, I personally believe wasn't the smartest use of surveillance during the pandemic, but still I'm sure it can help track infected people, and it can be helpful in that sense, especially in the current scenario.
But is it not easily compromised? I'm sorry to interrupt. Just a thought. I thought it's easy to compromise. You can just simply toggle some settings. You can switch off certain things, and you're good to go. Even if you're infected, woohoo!
That's why I said I don't think Arogya Setu is the smartest, because you need to declare yourself to have had symptoms in order to be watched.
There is something called the Ratchet Effect that comes into play in times of pandemic and in the context of surveillance. What Ratchet Effect is Ratchet Effect basically emerged as a term in the Keynesian economics, but now it is being used by sociologists. So sociologists argue that what will happen is that during the time of pandemic currently, the government, the need for surveillance is great, and the government is using extensive surveillance powers which are justified today. But when this pandemic will get over, when we will no longer need that degree of surveillance, the government will not be ready to reduce their surveillance powers. They will continue with those extensive powers. So even when the need will decrease, the power won't decrease, the accountability will decrease, the government will decrease, and hence the extensive surveillance that we are using today, that we are promoting today, will create a lot of problems for us in the future. So that is a concern. That is what makes us so paranoid about the idea of surveillance. And if we look at where China is leading in terms of surveillance, we see some very great harms that come from surveillance, right? They're using facial recognition technology in order to grade citizens of how loyal they are to the government and then give them services according to their loyalty. So citizens who engage in protests, who do activities that are anti-government, are not given as high an internet speed as other citizens. So it's a clear case of how surveillance can be misused by the government sometimes. More or less, that's the debate about surveillance, and that is what makes it so interesting. If you want to read more about surveillance, look about how surveillance is today creating a digital panopticon in the societies.
When it comes to like how technology and surveillance, because I think that's the absolutely scariest, if you are that paranoid a person, that's the scariest thing about it, is the way artificial intelligence could be applied. For example, like the advanced facial recognition software that is available now. Just an example for our viewers, was used extensively during the Black Lives Matter protests in the US, wherein people who were at the protests, through cameras, through public cameras, all of those faces that could be captured. All that data was saved, and later when those people were found using this facial recognition software, sometimes maybe just walking into Walmart on a Sunday, or next time they are caught on a traffic camera, those people were then tracked down and in some cases warned, in some cases imprisoned even. And that's how they used it. Another example in India was when there were some rallies of a certain political party happening in India, and when the Home Minister of India was giving a rally somewhere in New Delhi, they actually screened people who were entering the venue using facial recognition software, and many people were just pushed to the side, including some journalists, and strangely enough, many young students who had been part of the CAA protests in Delhi beforehand. So no matter what side of the issue you are on, one has to agree that this is an incredibly powerful tool, and right hands or wrong hands, the way it is being used is unprecedented in like modern times at least.
I'm sure, man, it's pretty scary to note that in times like this, in the 21st century, when things have really developed medically and technologically, you should, I feel that you should feel safer in these kind of terms if we have the right leadership across the entire globe, not only our country. However, it's just getting scarier and scarier, where the privacy, the whole concept of it is getting eradicated from the root.
So I don't know if you guys read one of the longer literature works that we had given specifically for the Lions division was 1984, which of course is a dystopian novel by George Orwell, and it discusses the concept of surveillance. They thought that by the time 1984 rolls around, the government would have its eyes in each and every house and would have control over each and every aspect of your life, because every single person would be marked and the data would be available to the government about everything about that person. So call it paranoid or whatever you like, but it was a look into the future. And read that book. It talks a lot about, there's mentions of class struggle, there's mention of what state surveillance can be, how intrusive the role of a state could be in the daily life of the citizens, if things are allowed to move on in that direction. So yeah, I thought that was a nice connection. So guys, it's just to sort of summarize, we have discussed technology and surveillance in pandemics, including in the current scenario. As Deeksha pointed out, it has been used all over the world, like the example of California in GPS tracking through ankle bracelets. It can be good in the terms of CCTV and people being held accountable for any crimes that they might be committing. For example, the Delhi government, one of their big pushes was to include CCTVs in public areas to stop crimes against women, and in buses as well. So that we all know that in Delhi buses and public transport for a long time, this was a big problem. And yeah, those were some of the things that are addressed. And it's not just about, it's not a terrible thing. Obviously, if you know there's someone looking, there are chances you won't perform terrible behavior. So it does play a deterrent to many things as far as that goes, I guess. So to close this podcast, we'd like to start by telling you guys about two musical selections in our reading list. And for those, of course, we have our resident musician and musical expert, Mr. Adil Sami.
Thanks, resident of, everyone is a resident at their homes right now. So we have two musical selections for today. The first one doesn't really need an introduction. If you haven't heard the song, at least you have heard the tune when you were a child in school or even older. So the song is We Shall Overcome. And if you don't know the song, it's Hum Honge Kamyab. So the tune is Hum Honge Kamyab Ek Din. The original version, the English version is We Shall Overcome. And so the thing about that song is that it's a gospel song, and it talks about the oneness and people getting together and bringing in the community and getting over difficult times in their lives. So it was a gospel song before, and then during the 1960s civil rights movement, the song was became famous and became like an anthem for the entire American community. So all the contemporaries, first Mr. Pete Seeger, whose song I'm going to introduce, the next song that I'm going to speak about, is also from that same artist. Pete Seeger and his contemporaries like Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, Dave Von Ronk, people like them, each and every one of them covered that song, We Shall Overcome. So it's a brilliant song. It talks about people getting together and human resilience, which is kind of part of one of the parts of your theme this year. And if you haven't heard that, hear that and check it out once. All right. So that's about We Shall Overcome. The second song, to introduce that, I'll sing a bit of it. The song is also by Pete Seeger. It's called "What Did You Learn in School Today?" Yeah. So basically, what I felt, what my interpretation about that song was that, we go to schools, we go to institutions to get education, to learn skills, to learn about the sciences, about the histories, and basically multiple disciplines. So it's great. It's a great place to learn a lot of skills, a lot of to gain a lot of knowledge in groups. However, a lot of things that we gain from these institutions can be one-sided, or can have a little bits of propaganda, or more of that. So it's just trying to focus on, or bring focus on, the fact that it's great that you're getting education from these institutions, but also be skeptic and question them. Do your own research, go outside, ask people, and ask multiple people, not only your family members or your friends. So just give me a moment.
One eternity later.
So the song itself has as sung by Pete Seeger, has a very Scottish kind of a feel. People like jumping and sorry, it has a Scottish feel. And yeah, so I'll just sing a few. I'll sing a few verses from the song. What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? I learned that Washington never told a lie. I learned that the soldiers seldom die. Learned that everybody's free. That's what the teacher said to me. That's what I learned in school today. That's what I learned in school. So this is the first verse. And yeah, I'm sure my colleagues have heard this song before. So guys, what comes in your mind when you hear this? When you hear these lyrics, that Washington never told a lie?
I think that's one of the US's myths that made the nation, right? That Washington chops the apple.
Great personality who never lies, always right.
Yeah. So that's just one example of the kind of lie that's repeated again and again and fed into people's brains. So he's using that. So I think there's a very nice counterpoint.
This is business.
That's created between these two things. The very lovely and wide-eyed rendition of the song versus the contents of the song. I found that very, very interesting.
Second lyrics is that soldiers seldom die, and that's what the teachers tell me. So making it very normal that you go to army and you die a heroic death, and that's very normal. And that is also what this person is trying to say, that you learn in school. For me, it's very sad. I don't know how you interpret that.
So the second verse that I'm going to talk about right now here. Okay, I'll just get right into it. What did you learn in school today, dear little girl of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? I learned our government must be strong. It's always right and never wrong. Our leaders are the finest men, so we elect them again and again. That's what I learned in school today. That's what I learned in school. So yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think that says it all. Yeah.
it says it all exactly.
So
Believing that one person is the supreme, the government being the supreme and being always right. Yeah, has always been a problem.
education has always been like a tool to build society, right? Like when in whatever Vedic times, the educational system was restricted to a few people of a certain background, and they used to learn things to fulfill that purpose of whatever godliness or saintliness. Post industrial revolution, everything changed because they had to create workers. So what else should a worker be able to do? The worker should be able to calculate that if I put 100 kg of rubber into the machine, then I can make 278 balls out of it. Thus, if I put a 1000 kg, then I will make 2780 balls out of it. That's how smart they need to be when it comes to the mathematical aspect. They should be able to read letters and should be able to read things like employees must wash hands. So they needed to learn a language. So I think the entire education system was based on creating workers. Every country has different things. In fact, within the same country, different governments with different ideologies or backgrounds would try and include different philosophical education. So I think it comments a lot on that aspect of school and education throughout. It's a lovely song, guys. Do check it out. Yeah, maybe Adil can record a version and put it up on SoundCloud as well, so that you don't have to bother with this Pete Seeger nonsense. No, he's a great singer. I'm sorry I said that. Yeah. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe. If you did not like this video, it's your fault. We told you last time that please tell us what you want us to talk about, and we will talk about it. So if you didn't like it, please comment, tell us what you would like for us to discuss next time. And still, subscribe. Subscribe, no. Why aren't you subscribing? Subscribe.